Gracie Jiu Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 148 of the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today I have the authors of the book, Transforming Trauma with Jiu Jitsu, a guide for survivors, therapists, and Jiu Jitsu practitioners to facilitate embodied recovery. And the authors are Jamie Marich and Anna Pirkl. So, Dr. Jamie Marich, PhD, speaks internationally on topics related to EMDR therapy, trauma, addiction, dissociation, expressive arts, yoga, and mindfulness, and maintains a private practice in her home base of Warren, Ohio. She founded and directs the Institute for Creative Mindfulness and developed the dancing mindfulness approach to expressive arts therapy, as well as yoga for clinicians. She's written numerous books, notably Trauma and the 12 Steps, An Inclusive Guide to Recovery, and she earned her Woman Empowered Pink Belt through Gracie University of Jiu Jitsu. Anna Pirkl, licensed marriage and family therapist, specializes in recovery from complex trauma, addiction, and anxiety disorders. She has worked with a wide range of clients from adolescents at Los Angeles Central Juvenile Hall to men in recovery at Sober Livings, to pregnant to parenting teens. She is the author of 12 creative experiences for personal growth in recovery. And as a seasoned presenter, she earned her Women's Empowered Pink Belt, Combatives Belt, and Blue Belt at Gracie University of Jiu Jitsu. In this interview, we talk about trauma and many things related to trauma and how Jiu Jitsu can be a vehicle for healing this trauma and a vehicle for growth. So I really enjoyed doing this interview, and I know you're going to like it. After the interview, make sure you stay tuned for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without further ado, let's talk to Jamie and Anna. All right, I am speaking with Dr. Jamie Marich, PhD, and Anna Pirkl, LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist, and they are the authors of Transforming Trauma with Jiu Jitsu. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Marty, for having us.
It is my pleasure. I'm excited to talk today about this awesome book. So, and you know, it's such an important subject, trauma, and I'm really glad we are going to have a chance to talk about it today, and excited that you wrote the book about it and about how Jiu Jitsu can help people heal and transform their trauma. So let's just get started by getting to know you guys a little better. If you would, just tell us who you are and a bit about your background, and then we'll get into the book and other things. So whoever wants to go first, just go ahead.
So I'll go first. I'm Jamie. I'm just Jamie, really, but professionally, I'm Dr. Jamie Marich, and I've written many books in the field of trauma recovery. I've been a trainer in a method called EMDR therapy, which is a now widely recognized treatment for post-traumatic stress. So I've been training that in some level since 2010. Healing trauma as a therapist has been my passion, largely because I got into this field through my own experiences with addiction recovery and trauma recovery. And I found Gracie Jiu Jitsu in 2016, going into 2017. And I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that story during this podcast interview. And it really was a missing piece for me, both in my own trauma recovery and helping me realize just how much martial arts, specifically Jiu Jitsu, could give to the folks I work with. So I was speaking about Jiu Jitsu on a trauma podcast, a recovery podcast specifically, at the end of 2017. And somebody heard that and passed it along to Anna. And then after Anna listened to me talking about my love for Jiu Jitsu on that podcast, she reached out to me. I still remember the voicemail very clearly. I was in Montana when I got it. And we became friends pretty instantly and endeavored on this work together.
That's awesome.
And
Anna?
yes, I'm always looking as a clinician for self-defense training for my kiddo, or sorry, not my kiddos, for my clients and my kiddo, actually, for my child too. And I treat complex trauma, and I'm always trying to make sure that my clients, especially my adolescents, when they launch off to college, they don't go and collect some more if there's something we can do to prevent it. And so I've been in all the eye gouging, groin striking, self-defense classes out there. And when I first discovered jiu-jitsu, I was just in love day one, because I didn't have to become the bad guy to defend against the bad guy. And I was very curious about whatever this was. And then it just happened at the same time. I was working at a men's sober living, and the owner was a black belt instructor at Crohn's Gracie, and was using it as a tool for healing at his center. And one of the guys told me I had to watch this podcast because this amazing woman talking about jiu-jitsu that was a clinician and having some thoughts about the healing power of jiu-jitsu. So I immediately looked that up, found Dr. Marich and stalked her online and went, wow, this is a clinical giant. And I want to, at a minimum, reach out and just express my gratitude for the work that she's doing. And if she in the future, wanted any help with anything she was doing, that I would love to be a part of or contribute in some small way. So just really, really excited that I've had the opportunity to get to know her better. And I also wanted to stop for a second too and express my gratitude for you, Marty. I just can't thank you enough for the breathing program you put together. I just, the life of me, I've always told, breathe, but then nobody was telling me how to breathe or how to get better at breathing. And it was just so refreshing and so helpful to finally get some really concrete instruction on that in your program. So thank you for that.
Well, that's definitely my pleasure. And thank you for saying that. That's been an awesome journey for me, is the breathing. And like all of us who are lifelong learners, I still continue to grow and develop and look for more knowledge along the way. So thank you so much for acknowledging that. Dr. Jamie, I would like to ask you to just the EMDR, fascinating stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to tell all of us just a little bit more about that, since I know you're a specialist in that.
So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And formally, it was discovered as a therapy between 1987 and 1989 by a Bay Area psychologist named Francine Shapiro. And as a cancer survivor, she was a student of mind-body medicine and was very curious about the interplay between various bodily processes, and had studied a lot with meditation and visualization. And as the story goes, she was taking a walk in a park one day, and she noticed that as she was thinking of some distressing thoughts, her eyes started to move in a back and forth rapid way. And she just stayed with that process kind of very curiously to see what would happen. And from there, she developed an entire protocol based on her experience, which is where these rapid eye movements, I often think it's interesting, she was taking a walk leading up to that, how it really led to a decrease in the overall disturbance of the memories she was experiencing. Mm. So EMDR is now one of the most researched and validated treatments in post-traumatic stress disorder. And it does bring together a lot of the greatest hits from several different therapeutic modalities and approaches. But there's something about this bilateral stimulation, or moving the eyes back and forth, walking back and forth, using audio tones, which a lot of therapists have back and forth, that really does bring up some kind of accelerated healing mechanism. Now, as this relates to jiu-jitsu, it was fascinating to me because when we interviewed Guy Valente for the book, he was telling us how his father, the late Pedro Valente Sr., insisted that all the Valente children get trained in jiu-jitsu, swimming, and horseback riding, because he very much felt that those were the three essential skills they needed to survive. And I remember getting chills during that interview because horseback riding is an example of bilateral stimulation, because the horse is moving back and forth, one foot to the other, or in this case, 2 feet at a time. And the human body is experiencing that back and forth motion. Swimming is obviously bilateral, and jiu-jitsu is bilateral, because whatever you do on one side, we're kind of training and do it on the other, and we're naturally moving our body in a back and forth way in a lot of our maneuvers. So I really think a lot of what Shapiro tapped into with EMDR is some kind of natural process that we have for healing ourselves and for bringing us to a place of surviving and thriving.
Yeah, it's super fascinating stuff. I got exposed to a little bit of it years ago, but I just definitely find it fascinating. So I'll put a link in the show notes for people who want to learn more about that. Let's talk a little bit more get more into the jiu-jitsu specifically. If you haven't shared already, share exactly how you got exposed to jiu-jitsu and what that journey's been like up until now for you guys, and then we'll get into your book.
So I got exposed to jiu-jitsu through my stepsons. One was having a behavioral problem, and his father, my ex-husband, and I decided to enroll him in jiu-jitsu. And I watched the boys train and eventually my ex-husband train over the course of several years. And I was really impressed, especially what jiu-jitsu did for the boys. And I took a women's self-defense class that they offered at the school that they were training at. Did not like it. I was very triggered. I knew there was something there, but just something about it didn't rest well with me, and I didn't feel I could handle it. And then a few months later, my stepson suggested, why don't you try a class with this other instructor? Because I think you'll really like it. And as I like to say, I went to a group class with him, one of the Gracie trial classes, and I found it sucked a lot less with this instructor. But I knew that if I was going to get this, I would have to study with this guy, and his name's Micah Bender, who was the coach that really changed my life. And I ended up taking private training with him, using the Women Empowered curriculum primarily that was offered online through Gracie University. And we also did some combatives work together. And it was great because during our first private lesson, he was willing to just like sit with me and listen to my concerns as a trauma survivor. And then, like a lot of us, I found the magic in jiu-jitsu. I loved how my body felt when I trained it. It really helped me work through a lot of the remaining blocks that I had, even though I had been exposed to so much trauma therapy already. So that's the short of it.
Nice. What about you, Anna?
So, I was a seasoned client of therapy myself when I arrived on those mats, and I really thought that I had done all the house cleaning I needed to do. So I was shocked and amazed when I was triggered, specifically by Henner. And I'm the opposite to Jamie, which is such a beautiful thing. In a lot of ways, we have a different experience on the mats, but still healing, because there's the fight, flight, freeze, and I'm the fight reaction, and Jamie sometimes can be more of a freeze or flight. And I was shocked that I was totally reacting to him, and what I discovered is that he looked a lot like a prior attacker of mine. And they handled it with awesome grace and respect. They just asked me what they could do to make it safe for me to continue to train. Less Henner, more Henner, less Hennergy. They like to joke about that. I ended up testing with him on purpose. Funny thing was, I pre-tested the day before with another instructor and, almost got close to 100. I mean, did really well. But then as soon as Henner walked in the door, I was triggered. I screamed. I was like, back up. And Henner's like, maybe you want to get a sip of water. And I'm like, no, get it out of us. I ended up actually hitting him during the test. I blacked out. There were, somehow I managed to pass. I passed the test. And
that was a real test.
It was a real test, right? And that's what I wanted. And the funny thing was, when I had figured out that he looked like my attacker, I instinctively went to Facebook. I looked up this guy, I saw his picture, and it was all right there. I felt like I had just ate something that I needed to throw up. I felt sticky. I felt angry. I was so triggered. Anyway, after the test, I passed the test. The instructors are joking with me, Anna, will you ever return to your normal color? Because I'm not red, I'm like purple. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'll ever be a normal color again. But anyway, I get in my Jeep and I'm cruising through. I look at his picture again, and I just sat there and I said out loud to his picture, like he could hear me, you can't hurt me anymore. But then the kicker was, I said, I forgive you.
Wow.
And I went, oh my gosh, wait a minute, hold up. For years, I've been trying to help my clients let go or forgive, or, that concept of forgiveness, right? Yeah. And I read all the books, I gave them the books, and, you get it, you're inspired by these other people's forgiveness processes. But it hit me in that moment that until I felt safer, until I had some answers for that scenario, my brain was going to stay vigilant, and it was not going to let go of anything. Mm-hmm. And so when I had that moment, I said, wow, this needs to be shared. And something just happened to my body and my brain that I have not had in all these other years of therapy. So yeah, that was when I don't care who's writing a book, I want to share my little bit of experience or whatever, because it's just incredible.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It's very powerful. Amazing. And we're going to get more into how Jiu-Jitsu specifically for the masses, if you will, how Jiu-Jitsu can help with trauma. But thank you guys for sharing your specific stories about Jiu-Jitsu. And let's back up a little bit and just talk about trauma in general as a subject. I mean, there's so much more to trauma, and it's much more common than people realize, right? And it takes quite a toll on people's lives. So if you guys would just share more about trauma and what you've seen and what kind of toll it takes on people's lives.
So one of the reasons, or one of the things we like to clarify, is many people in the general public assume that trauma means post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a legitimate clinical condition. And as Anna said, we now have a manifestation called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where it's really alluding to the early developmental trauma or traumas that accumulate over time. And a lot of people don't think they've been affected by trauma because a lot of their life experiences have never been validated as traumatic. Many of us grew up in environments where we're taught to shut up, deal with it. And it's just like, okay, this is normal. This is life. And I know in my experience, it wasn't until I attempted to get sober that I realized, wow, so many of these experiences I have definitely qualify as traumatic. So trauma, the English word trauma, comes from the Greek word meaning wound. And when I train this in clinical settings, I really think we need to start there. And it's also how kind of the general public needs to start their understanding of it. That any wound we've experienced, physical, emotional, mental, social, sexual, spiritual, if that woundedness remains unhealed, it can stay stored in a state in our brain that continues to cause symptoms, which can be very low grade to very severe. And symptoms can include things like the fight, flight, freeze that Anna was speaking to. It can show up in things like problems in living, just not wanting to engage with life, withdrawing from life, not being effective in relationships. Obviously, it can manifest as addiction or other forms of emotional avoidance. So even if a person can't admit they've been traumatized, I would ask them to start with, have you been wounded? And is there evidence that some of this wounding in your life is maybe still affecting you?
Great way to put it. I mean, that's powerful. Like you said, until it's healed, and people may have trouble. Some people are saying they were traumatized or experienced trauma, but I like how you rephrased it there and reframed it, because they may be more apt to see that or admit that. But, until it's healed, like you said, it's going to manifest in some way. And Unfortunately, this is why, you look back under your life and for some people and say, I was in a relationship years ago. That person might have been a great person for me, but I wasn't out of place. You know what I mean? I hadn't healed my stuff. So how can I even attempt or start to be the kind of person that would be healthy in a relationship? So anyway, it affects all parts of your life, some more than others. But Anna, what do you have to add into that?
Yeah, I would really want to accentuate what Jamie's talking about. If people are not believing this, they can go look up the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, one of the largest mental health studies ever done in the history of this research. And what blows me away is they came up with these 10 questions that really identify if somebody's lifespan actually gets shortened by things they experienced as a child. And the questions are everything we would normally expect, with the exception of one. I think, because all the other ones are physical abuse, sexual abuse, those kinds of things. But number 4 is, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special?
Wow.
That in and of itself, not being seen, not being looked out for, counts as trauma. And so, I really think that it touches all of our lives. And it's really important. And we put disclaimers all over the place because, there's some crazy gyms out there where you might actually collect some more trauma. And there's a big section of our book dedicated to trying to keep people safe, and picking something that honors them. And, even today, as we're talking to our listeners, we want them to know that this is information for your educational purposes only. And you really need to honor yourself and your process and talk to your own support team as to when and if it's right for you to get on the mats, and just, really knowing where you are at, taking good care of yourself in it. One of the things that trauma does is, makes us a little vigilant, right? We don't want to encounter this again. And as such, for a lot of us, it starts shrinking our worlds, right? We're going to start avoiding certain people, places, or things. And one of the things we found in our research of the WE program is, women didn't even realize that was happening to them. But then after they gained these tools where they felt they could stay safer, they were opening up again parts of their lives and going out and trying things they weren't going to try before, and putting themselves in spaces because they felt safer. So it really can shrink your world in ways that you might not even recognize. And, I had a funny moment like that where I'm not a big dress kind of gal. I don't wear a lot of dresses. I like my baseball cap and my sweats. And one day I put on a dress, a professional one, as I was leaving the training academy. And, a couple of guys gave me the once over. And I remember in the past, if I got one of those looks, I would kind of like shrink away and almost sort of run out away from it. I didn't like that. And in that moment, I didn't care. I wasn't threatened by the fact that they were looking at me in a dress. Like it just somehow didn't even register anymore. It wasn't a threat. I'm like, look all you want. I could care less. And it was news to me that I even felt that way in the past about wearing a dress.
Oh,
interesting.
So yeah, it's interesting how, it affects us, and we don't even know it. We don't see our world shrinking until all of a sudden we gain them back. And we're like, wow, wait a minute. I didn't even know I was avoiding that.
That's such an important point, for sure, and a very true point. You said it's not just what maybe has happened, but sometimes what hadn't happened, like you're not being seen, or you didn't get the love and attention, or whatever you needed, whatever it was for you that you didn't get. What do you guys think of the current state of in the last few years with COVID? People, kids especially, and adolescents in different development stages, they didn't get the physical interaction and touch that they normally would, as far as in normal time. So do you guys feel like that was a trauma?
Well,
100%.
Yeah, and to the point, I want to emphasize what you said, Marty, is a well-known teaching of Peter Levine, who's a big trauma scholar, that we often talk about trauma as something that happens to you, but trauma can also be something that was withheld from you as well, such as affection, empathy, whatnot. And yeah, oh man, speaking of COVID, I mean, especially for jiu-jitsu players who really kind of need that therapeutic hug on the mats, right?
Yes, exactly.
I could see where COVID's definitely been a challenge. I mean, I think years will tell, the coming years will tell just how much COVID has impacted people. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say it's a global trauma we've all experienced together.
I agree with you. It's going to take a while before we realize the fullness, but that's one part of it that really, aside from, the other aspects of COVID, but just that lack of, hugs or different things that people get with healthy touch and safe touch. And it, especially at a, critical developmental stage, if you're not getting that, it's got to have an effect down the line. But you guys both mentioned addictions as well, and I'm no stranger to that arena. And I believe that for a great deal of, if not all, addictions, at the root is drama. What do you guys think?
For sure. Yeah. For sure.
Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, and I think it's common sense to a lot of us who've experienced addiction, right? Especially if we've been guided by sponsors or therapists who have really acknowledged the cause of trauma. And it's interesting because the addiction field in general kind of had this thesis, and a lot of people still have it, that addiction happens just because, that it is a brain disease. And I still adhere to a lot of the disease model of addiction, but there's the recognition that many different things can cause defects and disease at the level of the brain. And we're increasing our understanding now that unhealed trauma really does lie at the root of so much addiction. If it didn't specifically cause it, it could definitely exacerbate it, because a lot of people who develop an addiction, maybe because of genetic factors primarily, are often exposed to some kind of trauma when they're out there in their addiction. Some of the work that I'm doing with a colleague of mine is called a model of addiction as dissociation. And dissociation is a component of trauma studies where we look at the things the brain does to separate from the present moment, when the present moment becomes overwhelming or unbearable. And we're really looking at addiction now as a manifestation of dissociation, as a way to keep us, here but not here. Right. And and so many of us feel that we really have to move past some of this old thinking that you have to treat the addiction first and then the trauma. And of course, there's appropriate protocols and safeguards you can follow for making sure that a person's not going into the deep roots of their trauma work right away if that's not appropriate. But we can always be validating the role that trauma played in the development of a person's addiction and teaching them skills that will really help them manage craving and manage trigger at the level of the body. Something my first recovery sponsor told me is that your body tells you what's going on long before your head ever realizes it. Yet so many of us can feel so cut off from our bodies because of trauma. And so a lot of the methods that I either teach or endorse, like yoga, like dance, martial arts, specifically Jiu Jitsu, I think really have a role in helping a person reacquaint themselves with the physical body, to be able to listen to the signals of the physical body. Yes. And that's where it can be very imperative in recovery.
One of the quotes from your book is, human beings are a mind-body complex, and working with just one while ignoring the other is ineffective. So that really comes to mind when you're talking about the body. As a former massage therapist for many years, I saw firsthand how people store trauma in their body, and kind of body armoring, if you will, and in a safe place, when you can release some of that armoring, man, you could get some really profound releases. So I also worked with a psychologist for years and went through his counseling program, and I'm a huge advocate of talk therapy and traditional counseling, but I agree that if you really work with all of it, it's so much more effective. What we used to do sometimes, and this is like 25 years ago, he used a lot of hypnosis, and so I would give someone a massage, and once they're in a really nice, tranquil, state, he would go right in and do hypnosis, which made it a lot more effective. And man, that was extremely powerful. So I love that quote from your book. Anna, would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would want to add is that like anything, we can become addicted to work or anything else. And I'm not going to lie. As soon as I got excited about jiu-jitsu, I was like 10 plus hours on the mat.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, I'm not addicted. But then the broken ribs, and then I'm still training even though we're doing side mount. And I'm laying there trying to attempt to be doing the bad guy of side mount, right? And going, okay, Anna, I think it's time to see a therapist again.
Anna, you may have a problem.
Right. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Even if people do become even addicted to jiu-jitsu, I'm very much a harm reduction kind of gal. That my meth addicts are going to be drinking 20 cups of coffee. Right. And then we switch to tea, and then we try to stop that. And that was very much my process with jiu-jitsu as well. The pandemic put a really hard stop. That was super annoying. But over the years, I've been trying to figure out how to do balanced jiu-jitsu. And whenever I'm training, working with somebody who struggles with addiction, it's always right there in my note: build a balanced life, right? Mm-hmm. Balanced, healthy life. And I think a lot of times with everything we're trying like this, we might start off in a little sort of addictive behavior, and we have to go recognize it's happening, and then back away gently and try to get it back in balance again. But just backing up a second to even the touch, I feel like we were touch deprived long before the pandemic.
Oh, yeah,
just I mean, especially as adults, where all touch has now been sexualized and
right.
Everything else. And I would add to that my personal journey, one of the things that have surprised me even more recently after writing the book, of course you get all these new insights, right? Was that I really get to physically play on the mats. Mm-hmm. Physically play, right? Not just play a board game, but physically wrestle and play. And, I think especially us girls, because of our cultural norms, a lot of us don't get that opportunity, right? We're just supposed to play with our dollhouses, I guess. And the boys are over there wrestling, and we're missing out. Right. We're missing out on the push and pull that we need to do. You go to the zoo and see it in the animals, right? They're pushing and pulling and testing. And we need that too. So, it's just, I think after, 45, I think was when I first started. No, 44. I actually had my first time healthily playing on the mats. So, wow. I encourage women. I know it can be hard for a lot of women, especially if they're in co-gendered classes, but there's something magical there in being able to play physically.
Absolutely. Dr. Jamie, you have anything to add with that?
I echo Anna's thoughts fully.
All right. So another quote I love, and it speaks to just what you were just saying, is jiu-jitsu may have the potential to heal people in a way that conventional mental health treatments or traditional coping skills just cannot touch. So if you guys would elaborate a little bit on that, and how just how can jiu-jitsu be really effective in healing trauma and transformation?
So there's a phrase that trauma therapists used a lot, which is a completion tendency or reenactment. That the reason a lot of trauma survivors can get themselves into trouble, whether it's violence towards others, violence towards themselves, acting out, lashing out, is there is a real energetic need in the body to complete what they couldn't do at the time of the trauma. So, for example, if someone was pinning you down and you couldn't get them off of you, the body may have this real desire to hey, how do I get out of this trapped situation? And I know for me, I could speak to this personally. I am trapped has been one of my big cognitions that I've dealt with over the years. And for me, would often cause just a big state of shutdown. Or if I was trapped and somebody was kind of coming at me, like in an elevator, I had that happen once. It would be a combination of shut down and then yelling at them viciously. So there was that kind of stuck storyline in the physical body. And I remember specifically, it was the wrist pin variation on the trap and roll and the WE curriculum. And anybody who rolls would probably know that as well. It specifically taught me I can get somebody who's trapping me off of me. And when I was able to do it with men specifically, my body just felt this sense of freedom that it was like the storyline completed itself. And I think there's a lot of embodied practices where people can experience that sense of, okay, now the loop is completed. But I think for so many people who have been victimized, specifically by violence, one of the people we quote in the book, Christine Caldwell, says martial arts can give survivors of violence a safer, proactive way to work through a lot of these body traps and completion tendencies, instead of just kind of running amok out there on the street to fulfill these. So, I mean, that's really why I sing the praises of jiu-jitsu so much, as a place that, if it's done with a good instructor in a good school and under safe parameters, can help people work through completion tendency in a way that is adaptive for them.
I would accentuate that word story that Jamie was using. And a lot of my clients that are trauma survivors, they really suffer from nightmares and insomnia and an inability to sleep because the brain is just up at night trying to find answers, right? It wants to complete the story. It wants to keep you safe. Even myself, it'd be funny. You're just laying there and you have no idea why all of a sudden a memory from like 20 years ago is popping up, right? For a lot of my clients who have experienced this jiu-jitsu, the nightmares stop because, you might dream about it again, but this time you have answers, you have solutions, and you're not suffering. You're not woken. It's a dream. And I really do feel like me and a lot of my clients have shifted from the sort of victim place to the survivor place automatically, just because of the language they use in the mats when they instruct us in really good facilities. They're just commending you on the fact that you're still here, you did something right. And then you move to this place of activist and warrior because, the more experienced people on the mats are now helping others. And you're right. And so you're no longer a victim. Now you're a helper. And a warrior in a way, leading the charge. You don't even mean to. It just happens. That's how it happens in class. And then I would say you even move from there to it's just playtime. You become good. Let's redefine what playmate means. Right? You become this amazing playmate. And now, used to be when I first was learning jiu-jitsu, I would be vigilant and I'd be out and about, right? And I would see some big guy who I determined in my brain was sketchy. And I would automatically be, figuring out, how would I take him to the ground? Is it a double leg or sweep or, how would I do this, right? And
I do that all the time.
Right, exactly. It's this game. But I was vigilant in it. But then as time went by, the vigilant, that tone was gone and it just became fun. I'm like, ooh, cool. Let's see if we played this game, how I would take care of you, mister.
Right.
And it just became playful. And what I love about that is I imagine even in a real scenario where I was, attacked by somebody who legitimately had bad intent, that I might actually be laughing through this experience. Be like, okay, let's do this, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. We'll keep you safe and keep me safe and take you to the ground and hold you there until help can arrive. So. What
I love about that is, you shared how, well, first, Dr. Jamie, let me speak to that. Having someone pin you down when that's kind of one of your things has got to be the most terrifying thing. And and even people who don't have past trauma related to something similar, it's still an extremely uncomfortable place to be. So I don't know anything else. There's a lot of ways to work with trauma physically, but I don't know anything better than jiu-jitsu to get straight to the heart and put you in that position where, in a safe, trusting environment, of course, that can really help you address that head on like that. So,
and I remember, to that point, for years before I actually stepped on a jiu-jitsu mat, I knew intuitively, and I didn't really know the difference between the various martial arts, but I knew martial arts training would be good for some people. And I remember specifically sending some clients of mine in the direction of martial arts. It just never really appealed to me until it presented itself to me. Because yes, so many people just are stuck in this thing that happened to me, and I wasn't able to get myself out at the time. I wasn't able to defend myself at the time. And I just guess I intuitively knew at that point, what would it feel like if your body could learn a different response, if you had a chance to do that? So it's made sense to me as a professional for a lot years more than I've practiced. But then once I started practicing, it really became very, very real for me.
That's wonderful. Very powerful. And Anna, to you, with your talking about the shift that occurred from, coming from being in a victim place all the way through to activist warrior. What comes to mind is, you hear of a lot of stories of someone maybe going through something trauma like a rape, and when they finally were able to, and they go super vigilant at martial arts, maybe Krav Maga or one of these kind that are just totally, annihilating in your face kind of art. And they feel empowered. So they have effectively gone from victim to empowered and activist warrior. And that's one measure, I would say, or level of healing. But you took it even further till you brought it around and were able to be playful with it, a playtime or a playmate. And that is a whole different level of transformation.
It really is. And God bless the Krav Magas of the world. I love them too. There's room for that too.
Absolutely.
And though I really think there's something special, very special about the fact that I don't have to become the bad guy to stay safe from the bad guy. I don't necessarily, in certain circumstances, I might need to, break an arm, but we're taught the word submission, right? Where I potentially, if there's not, other bad guys coming, I can hold you here and, inflict some pain if I need to, if you're still trying to hurt me, and then I can back off. So I really love the spectrum of violence available, and the fact that the majority of it, there's a reason why it's called the gentle art. You really can work to protect your partner and whoever was even attacking you, so you could use this on a family member should you need to, and the majority of attacks are done, unfortunately, to women by people we know. Yep. And we're not, interested in sticking our finger in their eye,
Right.
I'm not going to do that to Tom from the fraternity that everybody knows and loves.
Right.
But, I do like creepy hug technique. I like other things, right? Where I'm going to let you know, Yep. You can try that with somebody else, but not with me. So thank you, Jiu Jitsu. Thank you, Helios. Thank you, Kano. Thank you.
Yeah, because it gives such more of a range of response, right?
Exactly.
And not again, nothing is karate, Krav, any of those things. And sometimes maybe that's needed, or perhaps.
Exactly.
And it's great to have those tools, but that go all out, the annihilation isn't always the answer. So it's great to have a lot more range of tools for different situations, though. So what do instructors of jiu-jitsu need to know about trauma, and that anyone that walks in may be a victim of trauma or have some healing that needs to happen, so that could affect their training or the environment itself. So what do you guys want to share about that?
Something I like to emphasize across the things I teach, is because I've also worked with a lot of yoga instructors too over the years, is I've run into some of this attitude that, well, we don't necessarily deal with trauma here or mental health here. And if you look at conservative statistics, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men have been the victim of some type of sexual assault. So if you look at that in the general population, chances are very high. I would say almost 100% that somebody in your class is going to be a sexual trauma survivor, not to mention all the other forms of trauma that we've discussed as well. So I'd really like to see an ethic where everybody who works with the public develops a more trauma-informed attitude, which is just realizing that, yes, you can challenge people without pushing people. Talking to people in a certain way goes a long way. Giving people the rights and the respect to take breaks if they need, especially if they're feeling flooded or overwhelmed. Giving teachers and coaches the tools to recognize what it means when somebody's getting flooded, when somebody might be past their edge. So, being trauma responsive, trauma informed is for anyone. And I'm glad that we're here in an element of sport having this discussion. So thank you for giving us the platform, Marty.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I would add to that, I think a lot of dojos across and different kinds of sports, the coaches, the masters, the leaders can come across pretty authoritarian. And it's not meant as disrespect. It's meant sort of as respect. Like, no, I'm the master here and I'm going to command you what to do. And language and word choice and tone by those people that conveys respect and humility, just really sort of, it's going to welcome people to the mats, make them feel welcome, but it also is going to open up the space that you're approachable and they can come and talk to you if they have a concern, or if they need something different, or if they need individual lessons. I have to say, the instructors that I appreciate the most, regardless of trauma, are the ones that come to the mat feeling like, yes, I have a lot to share with you, but I'm also humble and I have a lot to learn from you. I mean, Alex Ueda,
Yes.
one of my favorite
Amazing.
people on the planet, because of how he speaks to people, and even to the 5-year-old in the room. You'd think he was speaking to the Dalai Lama. He has a way of conveying respect.
Yes.
I think a lot of this is in language and tone. Even myself still like learning. We're trying to figure out if there's a way to replace bad guy, because of course we don't like that.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, language, and like Jamie already said, choice, really sort of emphasizing choice, because trauma is done in a way in which you weren't given any choice. So now on the mats, we need to be given a lot of choice. If I need a break, I can take a break. If I don't want to participate in this technique, I don't have to.
Yes, love that. And shout out to Alex. What an awesome guy he is.
Oh.
And another guy that comes to mind is Evandro Nunes, very similar as far as just exudes that openness, positiveness, and respect for everybody he encounters. So wonderful. Yeah, so I used to teach women's self-defense, and it was before I got into Women's Empowered and learned a lot of great things there. But even then, some of the most important things to me were setting the stage for, hey, anytime you're uncomfortable, and back to what Jamie said, you have choice here. And if you feel uncomfortable, let someone know. Say something. Get up. Don't participate in certain parts if you don't want. Whatever you need, you are in control of that. And I want to speak to instructors a little bit. Hearing different things like this, I think for some instructors it can become like, I'm not perfect. I can't be everything to everybody. And in any given class, I may have someone that's extremely conservative, someone that's extremely liberal, whatever. And not to get into politics, but it's like, how can I be everything to everybody? Well, don't worry about that. Just an air and an atmosphere of respect for every person, and set the stage for open communication. And I think that goes a long way. And like you said, the tone and the air of respect and the healthy communication goes a long way. I also wanted to acknowledge you guys put something about breathing in the book, which I think is great, because anytime you're working with any kind of emotions or trauma or anything, I think breathing is going to be a very powerful element to that. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Props to you guys for that. So
thank you very much. Yeah, we really, like, to echo what Anna said earlier, admire the work that you're doing. As a yoga teacher, I just thank you for that.
My pleasure. All right. One more quote I wanted to share is from the book. We cannot go back into the past and undo what's already been done. We can, however, learn new tools and thinking so we can work to prevent further traumas. Would you guys elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, part of the reality of the world is we're still living in a world with a lot of trauma, right? And something we know about trauma reprocessing and memory reconsolidation is that if we have dealt with previous traumas, it's not to say we won't continue to get wounded in the world, but it won't necessarily create the compounding effect. So for me, an important part of doing any kind of trauma work is kind of learning how to respond differently, learning how to be differently in the world. It's not to ever say like it's ever a victim's fault or whatnot, but just like trauma can be progressive, so can healing.
Wonderful.
And my dad has taught me that we really need to be growing and learning for the rest of our lives. And, he used to say that if you stop growing and learning, you're dead.
Love it.
So I think regardless of trauma, like that's our job as humans to just get out there and have some healthy growth and learning. And I was reading Jamie's latest book on dissociation, and it mentioned something about sort of like layers of the onion, and that's how we heal too. And it's gonna keep sort of peeling off. And, even this book, the day that we submitted it and the next day I'm like, I should have added this, and oftentimes I've struggled with what to put in it and what to put in a video, because we're going to continue to evolve. And something I said today is no longer okay a year from now, as we are supposed to.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is, when people ask me, well, what book should I read? I'm like, keep your eye on Bessel van der Kolk, keep your eye on Daniel Siegel, right? And what they're talking about. And of course, Dr. Marich is one of my favorites.
Yes.
Right. And
thank you.
Keep your eye out.
Read the women is what I like to say, because even though as a field we give a lot of attention to van der Kolk and Siegel, who have done a lot of stuff, there's a lot of great women writers on trauma out there. And yeah, just see who appeals to you and who really explains the world in a way that makes sense to you if you're deepening your trauma study.
Absolutely. And in case there are dojos out there that want to become more trauma informed, I'm available. So they can reach out to me on Psychology Today if they'd like me to come and, present to their instructors or, help them understand what that is.
Awesome. I'll definitely put links to that in the show notes as well. One thing I really love about your book, guys, to speak to what you just said, I think anybody that ever writes a book, once they're done, they think of things that would have been great to go in there, or wanted to include.
Yes.
I think that's just a given. But for so many people, that keeps them from actually completing things. They just get in this analysis paralysis and just can't. It's not perfect, and it may go on for years. But at some point, you got to accept it and make peace and say, this is it. And it will be different next week. Will be different next year. But guess what? What you have here is amazing. It's a very thorough book. It has something for everybody. And just well done. My props to you for writing such a great book on such an important subject.
Thank you so much.
Again, the book is Transforming Trauma with Jiu Jitsu, a guide for survivors, therapists, and Jiu Jitsu practitioners to facilitate embodied recovery. And it's from North Atlantic Books. And again, well done, guys. Thank you for sharing your process with us and your thoughts on this subject and educating us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Most welcome, Marty.
All right. Really enjoyed that conversation, that discussion with Dr. Jamie and Anna. What a relevant and super interesting subject. And I do think we definitely made a dent in the subject, but there's a lot more conversation to be had. So I encourage you to check out their book. And if you want to contact them as well for seminars or anything like that, you can find the links in the show notes. So really enjoyed it. Much respect to them. Up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment.
I would never pretend to be another. I would never want to be another. I would not change who I am just to fit in. I am me. I am not perfect, but I'm working on myself, working to become the best version of myself. I am working on myself to continue to expand my own self through my own work, in my own way. I am me. Not the me you think I am. Not the me you want me to be, but just me, the one I want to be. I am me. I make my own decisions. I don't follow. I walk my own path. It's not always easy, but I'd rather walk alone than walk with others in the wrong direction. I am me. I am strong. I have a big heart. I speak my truth. I don't back down. I am me. I don't settle. I go after what I want. I won't apologize for being me. I am me. I accept you. I accept everyone as they are, as they want to be. That's me.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page, and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.GJJR.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.